Welcome back to the discussion Zoning In on Information and Location in Government, sponsored by Here Technologies on Federal News Network. I'm your moderator, Scott Masioni, and I'm joined now by Pratik Desai. He's the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Global Public Sector at Here Technologies. He has a long title, and I'm sure there's a lot of smarts behind it. Pratik, thank you so much for joining us. And, I wanted to start by asking about the National Guard, who we just spoke to. They were saying that they need a lot of private sector integration. Sometimes they're trying to catch up to the private sector because they have certain agilities that the private sector doesn't, or private sector has more agilities than the public sector does. So, how can government agencies learn from innovations that the technology sector is working on, and how can they really try and stay at the speed of relevance?
Thank you so much, Scott. And that's a really great question. Now, the National Guard is one of 6 different types of government agencies, and this falls under the purview of public safety. So I really think that it's important to kind of have that context in mind. And what I tell, my business partners and peers and leaders kind of across the private and public sectors is that when you want to get acclimated to what the latest innovations are, literally just pick up the phone or get on your laptop and email your trusted partners. Fortunately for the technology companies, especially in the software space, we operate very much on the knowledge is free basis. We just have conversations and dialogue to really better understand one another. I mean, me personally, I'm very interested in knowing what are the key initiatives that the National Guard and its sister agencies are working on, Department of Homeland Security and FEMA. And as such, we can then tap into our repertoire of knowledge and understand what we need to share back with them. And there's a lot of really cool information out there. It's just a matter of having that constant dialogue. So it starts with a conversation.
Do you find that the government is open for these sorts of dialogues, and that there is enough back and forth between the two, or enough opportunities for the back and forth between the two?
That's a really good question. And I used the word trusted advisor earlier because I think there would be some prior reticence if it's just a cold email from somebody that is lacking context, which is why, my company, what we did is we launched a major initiative for the public sector. We've got an entire team behind this. And what we essentially said to the market was, we're going to share knowledge with the market for free. This is available out there completely ungated. You don't have to jump through any hoops to get it. Oftentimes, you just got to click on a link and sign into a webinar. You can download white papers and documents that we've constructed. And we really kind of go through all the different stages of work that, say, a National Guard would go through. I mean, ultimately, their playbook goes back to the 4 stages of emergency response. So mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And we really think that our messaging resonates well because not only is it available without jumping through any hoops, but we're speaking the language of our first responders and heroes.
And, it sort of seems like you're operating on this knowledge is power sort of idea, and that the more knowledge people have, the more that they'll be able to work with the government. How does that work in the data world sometimes when you have so much knowledge out there that it's hard to kind of stay up to date? How can you be working in that way, but also stay quick and agile and that sort of thing?
Well, I think it starts with asking questions. And oftentimes when we were in school, they would tell us, no question is a dumb question. And I think that wisdom carries over. I mean, if you take, for example, the question of what is data and why do I need it, it really starts with what is your end goal. And the end goal that we think it supports is decision support, which is to say that we're helping you get better at your job. The way that you get better at any job, whether it's you're running a landscaping business, you're a financial analyst, you're a bookkeeper, or you work in retail, no matter what, even government agencies, the goal is always the same, which is to reduce the error rate. For public safety agencies, the imperative is that a reduced error rate means more lives are saved. So we're always speaking the language of how do we help save more lives? How do we reduce emergency response times? How do we give you greater visibility in areas where, frankly, your eyes and ears can't tell you? What if you're in the middle of a storm? What if there's a disaster happening 500 miles away and the latest maps that you have are on paper and they haven't been updated in a decade? So that's where we come in and we provide kind of those additional eyes and ears. That's really what location intelligence, which is our bread and butter, is all about.
And when we're talking about the private sector versus the public sector, they're very different from each other. And innovation is sort of one of those things that is ingrained in culture. And if you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't have, maybe you're not always caught up, or you don't know that there could be a Google Maps out there or whatever. So, how do these differences carry over to, actually saving lives, and how can the private sector really help in those situations?
Yeah, so I mean, it starts with I want to make sure that our friends in the public sector understand that we take this with great passion and humility. And a lot of different agencies are at a different stage of their maturation. So it's okay if we're not talking about the latest and greatest right away. That's oftentimes where the conversation will occur. I mean, there's a lot of really exciting things that we're working on. We're providing terrestrial LiDAR. These are things that are being used for autonomous driving and will in the future be used in drone mapping and so on and so forth. You don't have to start there. What you really need to do is just have an open and candid conversation and see what you're working on. And for a lot of agencies, that really simply means, hey, I want to understand what traffic conditions are so that when I'm routing ambulances to fires, that I have real-time visibility into what routes to take and which ones to avoid so I can get there faster. There's a wealth of research out there that suggests that even shaving seconds off of an emergency response call correlates to more lives saved over the long run. So really, it's about just what is your day-to-day like? What are your pain points? And once we start to hear kind of those common themes of, okay, this sounds like a timing issue, this sounds like a visibility issue, this is a data blind spot, we can go back to our stack. We don't want you or expect you to know our stack. What we want you to know is that the entire ecosystem, every single technology company out there, we're here to be trusted advisors. We're not here to push product. And at the end of the day, like, if you're telling me you have a routing issue, I'm automatically thinking of, okay, here's how a potential solution can be stitched together. But again, it's going to be built around what these leaders and agencies need and want. You got to customize it to what they want.
So back in the 60s and 70s and during the Cold War, we saw a lot of the innovation coming from the Defense Department, from NASA. I mean, practically everything that we use today, they have some hand in, the internet, Velcro, styrofoam, all that stuff. Those innovations were coming from government. Today, they are not coming from government. And we're finding sort of this switch where government is not using the technologies that we are using in our everyday lives. Google Maps, maybe. That might be really frustrating if a National Guardsman may not be able to use Google Maps to pinpoint a location. What are you hearing from government when it comes to those sorts of frustrations, or trying to really just kind of catch up?
Yeah. So again, like depending on who we're talking to, there's one variable, which is kind of what stage of your maturity curve are you at. The second layer is, how close are you to the day to day? Are you literally the head of the agency? Are you the secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, or are you in kind of the day to day to support, disaster response preparedness? So that's kind of the second variable. But one thing that we're commonly hearing kind of at the ground level is information sharing is critical. Another thing is we're introducing ideas that we think are commonplace in the private sector, but are perhaps a little bit new in the public sector. And it's like this notion of not only preparing for disasters before they occur, but preparing at some regularity as a part of a whole body of work called scenario planning. This notion that you can actually conduct training exercises for the top 5 most common incidents that may occur in your jurisdiction on a monthly basis or even a bi-weekly basis. And the way you can do that is by using technology and tools to essentially model out a simulated world, a 3D world of where you're exactly operating, whether it's the East Coast, in Chicago, Midwest, West Coast. Like, we can help you build that world and then run through whatever your scenarios are. Did a light pole fall? Was there a 10-car pileup? Was there a fire in a high rise? We can help you do these things so that as you think about, like, when you're running a football play, when it's timeout or whether it's at halftime, you got your coach writing out on the whiteboard and your team is sitting there taking notes going, yeah, I see this now. We can do that with public safety agencies. We can essentially use technology that already exists, knowledge that already is existing in the agencies, combine the two together and unearth new insights on, say, hey, listen, we got to get better with how we respond to floods. We got to take into consideration that no matter what the freemium routing app tells us, there is a need for critical data, because that data goes out the window because it doesn't take into consideration the variables that we would say that would come up in a disaster.
I mean, that really sounds like a great way to kind of build solutions toward, issues that we're already having. And, one of the things that Colonel Hessling said was that, they have all these after action reports. So, Hurricane Harvey came through and it was a completely different storm. And now they have an after action report, which gave them an idea of what to do next time. But it sounds like through something like what Here Technologies is talking about is you can really think through something before it even happens and then be even better prepared, right?
You can literally model out a Hurricane Harvey, point blank period, right? The reason that disasters can be costly is because there's obviously a cost of inaction, but then B, there's a cost to lethargic behavior or hesitation. And all of that comes from just a lack of awareness or preparedness. It's nobody's fault. We're not all expected to be born knowing how to respond in a flood. But when we get together and build a program around it, use tools that we have in the toolkit, these things are off the truck. We're not building anything new. This is the innovations that we have in the private sector. I mean, yeah, they're probably about 10 years or at least 10 to 15 years ahead of where the public sector is, but we can bring that to bear and we can model out some of these scenarios so that it goes back to the 4 stages of emergency response. When you mitigate these disasters, you're essentially reducing the amount of calamitous damage that could ostensibly occur. So yeah, a Hurricane Harvey or even something small like there's a busted fire hydrant. Like, what do we do in that situation? Well, like using our location technology, we can tell you where all the intersections are. Where using real-time traffic, we can tell you where mobility trends typically occur, where the major centers of population density are. And we'll say, hey, listen, based on this data, A, B, and C roads need to be blocked off, route traffic this way, call in these following agencies and respond to it. That's just a very basic incident. There's over 24 different types of incidents that we talk about here to Technologies. And we believe that we have the wherewithal and support to really help enable scenario planning for all of them.
Exciting opportunities for the future. We're going to take a quick pause here. My guest today is Pratik Desai. He's the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Global Public Sector at Here Technologies. I'm your moderator, Scott Maucione, on the discussion Zoning In on Information and Location in Government, sponsored by Here Technologies on Federal News Network.